My homeland fell apart due to betrayal. My brother started an affair with my fiancée, and when I and my family found out about it, I told my brother. Growing up in the Johnson family wasn't just about sharing a last name. It was about living by a rule that was practically scripture. Blood is thicker than water. My mom, Linda, drilled this into our heads every single day. She'd say it like a mantra, her sharp brown eyes locking onto ours as if daring us to challenge her. You never betray family, she'd repeat. Even when they're wrong, you stand by them. I'm Mason, the youngest of 3 siblings. My older brother, Ethan, was the golden boy, the one who could charm his way out of anything. Then there was Scarlett, the middle child, who always had a sharp tongue and an uncanny ability to twist the truth to her advantage. And me? I was the one who observed, who listened, who never forgot anything. Our lives revolved around loyalty. If Ethan got into trouble at school, we all crafted alibis. When Scarlett lied to her boyfriend about where she was one weekend, we all covered for her. It wasn't just expected, it was demanded. And at first, it felt like love, like we were untouchable because we had each other's backs. But eventually, I realized it was more like a chain that bound us together, no matter how toxic things got. It all started unraveling the summer Ethan turned 26. He had just gotten engaged to Ava, his college sweetheart. Ava was sweet, too sweet, and I always wondered if she really knew what she was getting into with our family. Scarlett hated her immediately, calling her boring and too perfect. The tension came to a head at a family dinner. Ava had brought homemade lasagna, her attempt to impress Mom. Scarlett took one bite, made a face, and said, "Did you use a recipe? Or did you just throw whatever you had lying around?" Ethan's face turned red. "Knock it off, Scarlett." "What?" Scarlett said, smirking. "I'm just being honest." Ava looked like she wanted to sink into the floor, but Mom didn't say a word. That was her thing. She let us sort it out ourselves, no matter how brutal it got. Blood is thicker than water, she'd say, and the strong survive. A few weeks later, Scarlett dropped a bombshell. She came to me late one night, her eyes wild and voice hushed. "I found something," she whispered. "About Ava." "What are you talking about?" She pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots of some old social media posts Ava had made in college. They weren't flattering. Pictures of her at wild parties, a few comments that could be taken out of context. But then there was one that made my stomach drop. Ava standing next to a guy who wasn't Ethan, her arm around his waist, with the caption, "Love of my life." "She's a liar," Scarlett said. "She's playing Ethan." I didn't know what to say. It didn't feel right to judge Ava based on her past, but I also knew Scarlett wouldn't let this go. Scarlett showed the screenshots to Mom, who, in typical fashion, didn't react much. "If it's true, Ethan deserves to know," she said. "But handle it carefully. We don't air our dirty laundry for the world to see." Scarlett, of course, handled it like a wrecking ball. She confronted Ava at Ethan's birthday party, in front of everyone. "So, Ava," Scarlett said, holding up her phone, "care to explain this?" The room went silent. Ethan looked confused, then furious as he snatched the phone from Scarlett. Ava turned pale. "That's from years ago," she stammered. "It's not what it looks like." "Then what is it?" Scarlett shot back. Ethan stood up, his jaw clenched. "Scarlett, stop. This is none of your business." "She's lying to you, Ethan," Scarlett shouted. "You deserve to know the truth." Ava burst into tears and ran out of the room. Ethan glared at Scarlett. "You just can't help yourself, can you?" That night, Ethan stayed at Ava's place, and Scarlett acted like she'd won some kind of victory. But a week later, Ethan dropped another bombshell. He and Ava were eloping. "Are you serious?" Mom said, her voice sharp. "After everything Scarlett found?" "It's none of your business," Ethan said. "We're leaving tomorrow." Mom tried to talk him out of it, but Ethan was firm. Scarlett, however, wasn't done. She cornered me later that night, her eyes blazing. "We have to stop him," she said. "Why?" I asked. "If he wants to marry her, that's his choice. Because she's going to ruin his life." Scarlett snapped. "And if you don't help me, you're just as bad as she is." The next day, Ethan and Ava left town, and Scarlett spiraled. She started drinking more, lashing out at everyone. Mom tried to keep the family together, but the cracks were too deep. One night, Scarlett showed up at Ethan's apartment, drunk and screaming. Ava called the police, and Scarlett spent the night in jail. That was the moment I realized our family rule wasn't about loyalty, it was about control. Mom's mantra of blood is thicker than water had twisted into something toxic, something that made us enemies instead of allies. Growing up, Alex was everything I wanted to be. He was the golden child, the kind of person people gravitate to without even realizing it. Everyone adored him. Our parents, his friends, even my friends. He had the confidence, the charisma, and that unshakable belief in himself that made everything seem effortless. And me? I was Thomas, the younger brother always standing in his shadow. I'm 28 now, and Alex is 33. Despite everything, I still looked up to him. He had the perfect job, the perfect girlfriend, and a life that seemed to glow with promise. Meanwhile, I worked in construction, pulling long hours and scraping together enough money to stay afloat. I wasn't ashamed of what I did. Hard work is hard work, but it was hard not to feel like I was always playing catch-up. It started last Christmas when Alex brought his girlfriend, Melanie, to the family gathering. Melanie was stunning. Long dark hair, piercing green eyes, and a smile that could light up a room. She was warm, funny, and genuinely seemed to care about Alex. My parents were instantly smitten. They kept talking about how perfect they were together, how they couldn't wait for Alex to pop the question. That night, after most of the family had gone to bed, Alex and I stayed up in the living room, drinking beer and talking. He was relaxed, more honest than usual. "I think she's the one," he said, staring into the fire. "Melanie?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. "Yeah, she's different, you know? Like, she makes me feel like I don't have to prove anything." I smiled, even though something twisted in my chest. "That's good. You deserve it. Don't be a stranger to her, Thomas," Alex added. "She likes you, you know. Said you were funny." That caught me off guard. I didn't think Melanie had noticed me much at all. Over the next few months, Alex and Melanie became a fixture in our family's life. They visited often, and Melanie always went out of her way to make conversation with me. At first, I thought it was just her being polite, but soon, I realized she was genuinely interested in what I had to say. It felt nice, but it also made me uneasy. She was Alex's girlfriend, after all. The first shocking moment came during a weekend trip to our family cabin. Alex had planned the getaway as a chance for us to unwind. It was just the three of us, me, Alex, and Melanie. On the second night, after Alex had gone to bed early, Melanie and I stayed up playing cards and drinking wine. She was tipsy, laughing at my terrible jokes, and at one point, she put her hand on mine. "You're really something, you know that," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. I froze. "Melanie, I'm just saying, you don't give yourself enough credit." I didn't know how to respond. The moment lingered, heavy and awkward, before I pulled my hand away and mumbled something about getting more wine. The next day, Melanie acted like nothing had happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. A few weeks later, Alex called me, his voice strained. "Thomas, I need to talk to you. Can you come over?" When I arrived at his apartment, he was pacing the living room. Melanie wasn't there. "What's going on?" I asked. "Melanie's been acting weird lately," he said. "Distant. I don't know if it's something I did or if she's just—" "I don't know." I didn't know what to say. The guilt gnawed at me, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. At least, not really. I reassured him, told him Melanie probably just needed space. But deep down, I couldn't shake the fear that I had somehow caused this. Things escalated at our parents' anniversary dinner. Alex was late, which was unusual for him. When he finally arrived, he looked disheveled, his usual confidence replaced by something frantic. Melanie wasn't with him. "She's gone," he said as soon as he sat down. "What do you mean gone?" my mom asked, her face pale. "She left," Alex said, his voice breaking. "Packed her stuff and left. Said she needed time to think." The room fell silent. Alex had never looked so vulnerable, so lost. I wanted to comfort him, but I also couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. 2 weeks later, Melanie showed up at my apartment. It was late, and she looked like she'd been crying. I didn't know where else to go, she said. I let her in, trying to keep my emotions in check. She sat on my couch, her head in her hands. I love him, she said, her voice trembling. I really do. But I don't know if I can do this anymore. Do what? I asked. Be what he needs me to be, she said, looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. He's perfect, you know? Everyone thinks he's perfect. But he's so much pressure. So much expectation. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew what she meant. Alex had always been the golden boy, the one everyone looked up to. But hearing it from her made it feel like a betrayal. The situation spiraled from there. Melanie stayed the night, though nothing happened between us. The next morning, she left, and I told myself I wouldn't get involved any further. But the guilt was eating me alive. I knew I had to tell Alex, but I also knew it would destroy him. Before I could decide what to do, Alex showed up at my door. He looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot. I need to know the truth, he said. Is there something going on between you and Melanie? I froze. What? No. Of course not. Then why did she come here? He asked, his voice rising. She told me she stayed here, Thomas. Why? I had no answer. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I can't believe this, Alex said, his voice breaking. You were the one person I thought I could trust. That night, Alex left, slamming the door behind him. I didn't hear from him for weeks. When I finally did, it was through our mom, who told me Alex had moved out of state. He hadn't told anyone where he was going. Our family hasn't been the same since. The golden boy, the one who held us all together, was gone. And I was left to pick up the pieces, knowing I'd been the one to shatter everything. When I got engaged to Rachel, it felt like my life was finally coming together. She was everything I thought I wanted, kind, supportive, and beautiful in a way that wasn't intimidating but felt warm and familiar. My family adored her from the start, especially my brother Alex. He even joked at the engagement party, "Thomas, you've finally outdone me." Everyone laughed, and for once, I felt like I was standing in my own spotlight. Rachel fit into the Johnson family seamlessly. She had an easy way of making people feel comfortable, and she knew how to handle my mom's sometimes overbearing tendencies. It didn't take long for my parents to start calling her the daughter they'd never had, which only made me love her more. But the connection between Rachel and Alex started to bother me in ways I couldn't quite explain. It began innocently enough. Alex would joke around with Rachel at family dinners, making everyone laugh with his quick wit. At first, I was glad they got along so well. Rachel always said she admired Alex for how confident and accomplished he was. "He's just so charming," she told me once, smiling. I agreed, though something about the way she said it made me feel unsettled. The first real red flag came a few months after our engagement. Rachel and I were planning the wedding, and Alex offered to help. "I've got connections," he said, flashing his trademark grin. "I can get you guys a great deal on a venue." Rachel was thrilled. She and Alex started exchanging ideas, texting constantly about everything from catering options to flower arrangements. I tried not to let it bother me, but one night, when I glanced at Rachel's phone, I saw a string of messages from Alex. They weren't inappropriate, just long, detailed conversations about the wedding. But it felt excessive. Why was he so involved? Things escalated during Rachel's birthday dinner. Alex had gone out of his way to plan a surprise party for her, something I hadn't even considered. When I walked into the restaurant and saw the elaborate setup, balloons, a custom cake, and a slideshow of Rachel's childhood photos, I felt like a guest at my own fiancée's celebration. "Do you like it?" Alex asked Rachel, his eyes bright with excitement. "I love it," she said, hugging him tightly. "You're amazing." I stood there, plastering a smile on my face while my stomach churned. The night went on, and I tried to push my jealousy aside. But as I watched Rachel laugh at Alex's jokes, leaning into him like they were old friends, I couldn't ignore the growing knot in my chest. A week later, I finally brought it up to Rachel. We were sitting on the couch, going over wedding invitations, when I blurted out, "Do you think you and Alex are too close?" She looked at me, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," I said, fumbling for the right words. It just feels like you spend more time talking to him than you do to me. Rachel frowned. Thomas, that's ridiculous. He's helping us with the wedding. That's all. Is it? I asked, my voice rising despite myself. Because it doesn't feel like that. Her expression hardened. You're being insecure. Alex is your brother. He's just trying to help. I wanted to believe her, but the nagging doubt wouldn't go away. The breaking point came when I found out Rachel and Alex had gone to a wedding expo together without telling me. I only found out because my mom mentioned it in passing. I think it's so sweet that Alex is taking such an interest in your wedding, she said. He and Rachel make such a great team. I confronted Rachel that night, my anger barely contained. Why didn't you tell me you went to the expo with Alex? She looked taken aback. It wasn't a big deal. He offered to go because you were busy. That's not the point, I said, my voice shaking. The point is you didn't tell me. Rachel sighed, exasperated. Thomas, you're blowing this way out of proportion. Am I? I shot back. Because it feels like I'm being left out of my own wedding. Her silence was deafening. The final straw came a month before the wedding. I came home from work early and found Alex and Rachel in our apartment. They were sitting on the couch, laughing over something on her laptop. When they saw me, they both froze. What's going on? I asked, my voice cold. Alex was just helping me with the seating chart, Rachel said quickly. Of course he was, I said, my jaw clenched. Because why would you ask me, your fiancé, to help with that? Rachel stood up, her face flushed. Thomas, stop. You're making this into something it's not. Am I? I snapped. Because it looks a lot like you're more interested in spending time with him than with me. Alex stood up, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Hey, calm down, Thomas. There's nothing going on here. Stay out of this, I said, glaring at him. This is between me and Rachel. But the damage was done. The tension in the room was suffocating, and I could see in Rachel's eyes that she was hurt, but also angry. Over the next few weeks, things between Rachel and me grew colder. We barely talked, and when we did, it always ended in an argument. Alex, meanwhile, kept his distance, but I knew he was still talking to Rachel. I could feel it. The night before the wedding, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Alex and told him to meet me at a bar. When he arrived, I didn't waste any time. Do you have feelings for Rachel? I asked, my voice trembling. He stared at me, stunned. What? No. Thomas, she's your fiancée. Then why are you always around her? I demanded. Why do you act like this is your wedding instead of mine? Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. I was just trying to help, okay? I didn't mean to step on your toes. Well, you did, I said, my voice cracking. And now I don't even know if I can trust her, or you. The wedding day was a disaster. I couldn't shake the doubts, the jealousy, the feeling that something was wrong. When Rachel walked down the aisle, she looked beautiful, but all I could think about was the way she'd smiled at Alex during her birthday party, the way she'd laughed at his jokes. By the time we reached the reception, I was barely holding it together. And then, as Rachel and I danced our first dance, I saw Alex watching us from the corner of the room. He looked sad. It was the final nail in the coffin. That night, after everyone had gone home, I confronted Rachel one last time. Do you love me? I asked, my voice shaking. She looked at me, tears in her eyes. Of course I do. Then why do I feel like I'm losing you to him? I whispered. Her silence was the only answer I needed. The doubts had been gnawing at me for months. It started as a faint, almost imperceptible discomfort. Something about the way Rachel would light up when Alex walked into the room. At first, I brushed it off. She was just being friendly, I told myself. Alex was my brother. After all, he had that effect on people. But as time went on, the feeling grew into something darker, something I couldn't ignore. I started noticing the little things. Rachel would laugh a little too hard at Alex's jokes, touch his arm during conversations, or steal glances at him when she thought no one was watching. Alex, for his part, seemed to revel in the attention. He'd tease her, compliment her, and always make a point of sitting next to her at family gatherings. It was subtle enough that I felt like I was losing my mind for noticing it, but it was there. One night, As Rachel and I sat on the couch watching a movie, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and quickly set it face down on the table. My heart sank. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just Alex," she said casually, not meeting my eyes. "What did he want?" I pressed. "Nothing important," she replied, her tone dismissive. "He was just sending me a funny meme." I nodded, forcing myself to smile, but my mind was racing. Why was Alex texting her at 10 p.m.? And why did she feel the need to hide it from me? The breaking point came a few weeks later. Rachel had gone out for drinks with some coworkers, or so she said. She came home late, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't hers. I didn't say anything that night, but the seed of suspicion had been planted, and it was growing fast. The next day, I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, feeling equal parts guilty and justified. I went straight to her messages with Alex, and what I found made my stomach drop. The texts weren't explicit, but they were intimate. Inside jokes, late-night conversations, and references to secret meetups that I couldn't explain away. One message, in particular, stood out. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up. I hate lying to him." It was from Rachel, sent 2 weeks ago. Alex's response was a simple, "I know. I feel the same way." I didn't confront Rachel right away. I couldn't. I spent the next few days in a fog, replaying every interaction between her and Alex in my mind. Every touch, every laugh, every lingering glance now felt like a betrayal. But even with the evidence staring me in the face, I couldn't bring myself to believe it. I needed to hear it from her. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, I finally worked up the courage to ask. "Rachel," I said, my voice trembling, "is there something going on between you and Alex?" She froze, her fork hovering in midair. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone defensive. "You know what I'm talking about," I said, my voice rising. "I've seen the texts. I know you've been meeting up with him." Her face went pale, and for a moment, I thought she was going to deny it. But then she set her fork down and looked me straight in the eye. "Thomas," she said softly, "we need to talk." What followed was the most painful conversation of my life. Rachel admitted that she had feelings for Alex, feelings she claimed she hadn't intended to act on. But somewhere along the way, those feelings had turned into something more. They had been seeing each other for almost a year. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, Thomas. I really do. But I love Alex too." Her words hit me like a freight train. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "How could you do this to me?" I asked, my voice cracking. "To us? To our family?" "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, sobbing. "I thought I could handle it, but I couldn't." After Rachel's confession, I confronted Alex. I went to his apartment, my hands shaking with anger. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, his face fell. "You know, don't you?" he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "How could you?" I shouted, stepping inside. "You're my brother, Alex. My brother. How could you betray me like this?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said, his voice breaking. It just did." "That's not an excuse," I yelled. "You could have stopped it. You should have stopped it." Alex didn't argue. He just stood there, his head hanging, as I unleashed every ounce of anger and pain I had bottled up inside. When I finally ran out of words, he looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that doesn't mean anything, but I am." The fallout was catastrophic. Rachel moved out the next day, leaving behind the engagement ring and a note that I didn't bother reading. I couldn't bear to see her, to talk to her, to even think about her. Alex tried to reach out to me, but I ignored his calls and texts. As far as I was concerned, I didn't have a brother anymore. Our family was torn apart. My parents were devastated, my mom crying for days and my dad retreating into silence. When they found out what had happened, they begged me to forgive Alex, but I couldn't. "He's not my brother," I told them. "Not anymore." Months passed, but the pain didn't go away. Everywhere I went, I was haunted by memories of Rachel and Alex, of the life I thought I was building, and the people I thought I could trust. I tried to move on, to focus on work and friends, but the betrayal had left a wound that refused to heal. After Rachel's confession and Alex's betrayal, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The world I thought I knew, my family, my relationships, my future, had crumbled. The weeks that followed were a blur. I stopped answering calls, stopped showing up to work, stopped caring about anything at all. Depression isn't something that hits you all at once. It creeps in slowly, wrapping around you until it's suffocating. I spent most days in my apartment, curtains drawn, the air thick with stale coffee and regret. People tried to reach out. My mom called every day, leaving voicemails begging me to come home. My dad showed up unannounced once, standing in the doorway with a look I'd never seen before, part anger, part pity. "You can't keep hiding, Thomas," he said. "This isn't going to fix anything." "I don't want to fix anything," I snapped. "I just want to be left alone." He didn't push me, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes as he left. The cracks in the family only grew wider. My father, Richard, took my side almost immediately. He was a man of principle, someone who believed in loyalty and honor above all else. To him, Alex's betrayal wasn't just a personal failure. It was an unforgivable insult to the family. "I don't have a son named Alex anymore," he told me during one of his rare visits. The words should have brought me some comfort, but they didn't. They just made the emptiness inside me feel heavier. My mom, Linda, was the opposite. She couldn't stand the thought of the family falling apart. She started hosting weekly dinners, hoping to force us all back together. "Family is family," she'd say, her voice trembling with desperation. "We have to find a way to move past this." But every dinner turned into a disaster. Alex would show up, acting like nothing had happened, while my dad refused to even look at him. "You have no shame," my father spat at him during one particularly heated argument. "You walk in here like everything's fine, like you didn't destroy your brother's life." Alex would fire back, his voice laced with frustration. "I made a mistake, okay? I've apologized. What more do you want from me?" I sat silently through these exchanges, too numb to contribute. My mom would try to mediate, pleading with both of them to calm down. But it only made things worse. "Stop trying to fix this, Linda," my dad snapped one night. "Some things can't be fixed." The tension reached a boiling point during Thanksgiving. My mom insisted on having everyone over, determined to make it a normal family holiday. I didn't want to go, but she begged me, and I didn't have the energy to fight her. The atmosphere was suffocating from the moment I walked in. Alex was already there, sitting at the dining table with a forced smile. My dad was in the kitchen, muttering under his breath as he carved the turkey. My mom flitted around the room, trying to make conversation, but no one was listening. Dinner started off tense but quiet. Everyone focused on their plates, avoiding eye contact. But then Alex, in his infinite wisdom, decided to speak. "Look," he said, setting his fork down. "I know things have been hard lately, but we're still family. We can't let this tear us apart." My dad slammed his knife down on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "You think you get to say that?" he growled. "After everything you've done?" "I'm trying to make things right," Alex said, his voice strained. "I've apologized. I've tried to talk to Thomas." "Don't bring me into this," I interrupted, my voice cold. Alex turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Thomas, please. You're my brother. I know I messed up, but—" "You didn't mess up," I snapped. "You made a choice. You chose her over me, over this family." The room fell silent. My mom looked like she was about to cry. My dad pushed his chair back and stood up. "I'm done," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm not sitting here pretending everything's okay." He left the room, slamming the door behind him. My mom tried to follow, but he waved her off. "Don't, Linda," he said. "Just don't." After that night, the family was in shambles. My dad refused to attend any more family gatherings if Alex was going to be there. My mom tried to keep the peace, but her efforts only made things worse. She started calling me every day, begging me to forgive Alex. "He's your brother," she said over and over. "You can't stay mad at him forever." "Yes, I can," I replied. "He made his choice, Mom. Now he has to live with it." Her voice would break then, the weight of the situation finally getting to her. "I just want my family back," she whispered one night. "Is that too much to ask?" I didn't have an answer for her. One day, my mom organized a surprise family meeting. She didn't tell me Alex would be there, probably hoping I wouldn't show up if I knew. When I walked into the living room and saw him sitting there, I turned to leave, but my mom blocked the door. "Please, Thomas," she said, her voice desperate. "Just listen." I stayed, but only because I didn't want to make things harder for her. Alex launched into yet another apology, talking about how much he regretted what had happened, how he wanted to rebuild our relationship. His words felt hollow, rehearsed. "I don't care what you regret," I said when he finished. "You made your bed, Alex. Now lie in it." My dad nodded in agreement from across the room. "Thomas is right. You can't just erase what you did." My mom started crying then, breaking down in front of all of us. "Why are you all so stubborn?" she sobbed. "Why can't you just let this go?" But none of us could. The wounds were too deep, the betrayal too fresh. As the months went on, the family drifted further apart. I stopped attending the weekly dinners. My dad spent most of his time at work, avoiding the house as much as possible. My mom grew more and more withdrawn, her once vibrant personality dulled by the strain of trying to hold us together. And Alex? He kept reaching out, trying to repair the damage, but his efforts only seemed to make things worse. Every time I saw his name pop up on my phone, it felt like a slap in the face. Years had passed since Alex's betrayal. I wish I could say the pain had faded, that I'd moved on and rebuilt my life. But the truth was more complicated. I'd learned to live with the scars, but they were still there, constant reminders of what I'd lost. My relationship with Alex remained non-existent, and the family that once seemed unbreakable was now irreparably fractured. I rarely spoke to my mom, who still clung to the hope of reconciliation, and my dad had buried himself in work, avoiding all mention of Alex. Life moved on, but not smoothly. I stayed in my hometown, working the same job, quietly trying to piece myself back together. Alex, on the other hand, had moved to the city, chasing opportunities and, by all accounts, succeeding. He was still with Rachel, the woman who had once been my fiancée. The bitterness of that reality never quite went away, but I learned to bury it deep enough that it didn't consume me. It wasn't until one cold evening in late autumn that I got a call from my mom. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, so I figured it was another plea for us to patch things up. When I answered, her voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. "It's Alex," she said. "Something's happened." My heart sank. As much as I resented him, I didn't want anything terrible to happen to my brother. "What is it?" I asked cautiously. Rachel cheated on him," she said, her voice breaking. "With one of his closest friends." The words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I was silent, unsure how to respond. "And," I finally said, my tone colder than I intended. "He's devastated, Thomas," she continued. "He needs his family now more than ever." I didn't respond. Part of me wanted to laugh at the irony of it all. After all, this was the same man who had destroyed my life without a second thought. Why should I support him now that he was facing his own betrayal? Over the next few days, I learned more about what had happened. Alex had been seeing Rachel for years, but their relationship had started to unravel. He worked long hours, and Rachel had grown restless, or so my mom claimed. She began spending time with Alex's close friend and business partner, Jason, a charming, successful man who was almost a carbon copy of Alex. It started with innocent meetups, or so Rachel had said when Alex confronted her. Drinks after work, dinners to discuss business, and eventually, the affair. Alex found out when he came home early one evening to find Jason's jacket on the back of the couch and Rachel's guilty expression giving her away before she even spoke. The fallout was swift and brutal. Alex and Rachel broke up immediately, though Rachel tried to spin it as a mistake, claiming she still loved Alex. "It didn't mean anything," she reportedly said. "I was just lonely, and Jason was there." But Alex wasn't buying it. He threw her out of their apartment, severed ties with Jason, and retreated into himself. For weeks, my mom said, he barely left his place, drinking heavily and refusing to see anyone. "He needs his brother, Thomas," my mom pleaded during one of her calls. You're the only one who can help him through this." I wanted to scream at her. Did she really think I'd forgotten what Alex had done to me? Did she expect me to swoop in and comfort him now that he was on the receiving end of betrayal? "I'm not getting involved, Mom," I said firmly. "He made his choices. Now he has to deal with the consequences." My dad felt the same way. When my mom tried to convince him to reach out to Alex, he refused outright. "I don't have anything to say to him," he said. His tone as cold as I'd ever heard it. He brought this on himself. My mom didn't give up easily. She invited Alex to dinner, hoping to create an opportunity for reconciliation. I knew about the plan, but refused to participate. I didn't want to see Alex, let alone pretend everything was fine for my mom's sake. My dad didn't show up either, leaving her to host Alex alone. The dinner, according to my mom, was a disaster. Alex showed up drunk, his anger barely contained. When she tried to console him, he lashed out, accusing her of taking my side and abandoning him when he needed her most. "What do you want from me, Alex?" she reportedly asked, her voice breaking. "I'm trying to help you." "Help me?" he shouted. Where was this help when Thomas turned everyone against me? Where was it when Dad said I wasn't his son anymore? I heard about the argument later, but it didn't stir any sympathy in me. If anything, it confirmed what I already knew. Alex hadn't changed. He was still the same selfish, entitled person who thought the world owed him something. Despite my resolve to stay out of it, Alex reached out to me directly one night. It was late, and I was half asleep when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, but saw his name on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. There was a long pause before he spoke. "I'm sorry, Thomas." I blinked, caught off guard. "For what?" "For everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For Rachel, for what I did to you. I know I can't take it back, but I just needed to say it." The sincerity in his voice was unsettling. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "Why now?" I finally asked. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I get it now," he said. "I know what it feels like to be betrayed by someone you love. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, especially not you." His words hung in the air, heavy with years of unresolved pain. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to let go of the anger that had consumed me for so long. But another part of me, the part that remembered the sleepless nights, the heartbreak, the humiliation, couldn't do it. "I'm glad you finally understand," I said, my voice cold. "But it doesn't change anything." That conversation was the last time I heard from Alex. My mom continued to push for reconciliation, but I stayed firm. "Some things can't be undone," I told her. "And you can't force us to be a family again." Alex eventually moved away, cutting ties with most of us. My mom still talks about him occasionally, usually with a note of sadness in her voice. But my dad and I have both moved on, leaving the memories of his betrayal and his karma behind. The family never recovered after Alex's betrayal, and I'd stopped hoping it ever would. Time had done little to heal the wounds he caused, and instead of a cohesive family unit, we became a fragmented, divided mess. My dad, my sister Emily, and I had cut Alex out of our lives completely. Meanwhile, my mom clung to him, refusing to let go of the idea that we could somehow return to how things were before. Emily had been a relatively quiet presence throughout most of the drama. She was the youngest of us, 10 years younger than Alex and 6 years younger than me. Growing up, she had always idolized Alex in the way younger siblings often do. But after his betrayal, something in her shifted. She saw him for who he truly was, a selfish, manipulative man who put his own desires above everyone else. "I don't care what Mom says," she told me during one of our rare family gatherings. "What Alex did is unforgivable. He didn't just hurt you, Thomas. He destroyed this family." I agreed with her, but it didn't make the rift any easier to bear. Watching my mom continue to defend Alex, even after all he'd done, was like watching someone cling to a sinking ship. She held on to him with a kind of desperation that bordered on denial. Emily, despite her own pain, became my biggest supporter in the years following the fallout. She was the one who encouraged me to go to therapy, the one who reminded me that I deserved happiness even after everything I'd been through. "You can't let Alex ruin your life forever," she said one day over coffee. He's not worth it. Therapy wasn't easy at first. Sitting in a small, quiet room with a stranger and laying bare all the pain, anger, and betrayal I'd been carrying felt unnatural. But over time, it helped. My therapist, Dr. Carter, had a calm, steady presence that made it easier to confront the things I'd been avoiding. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, he said during one session. It doesn't mean you have to let Alex back into your life. It just means letting go of the power his actions have over you. Letting go was easier said than done, but I took his words to heart. Slowly, I started to rebuild my life. My dad, Richard, took a different approach. He buried himself in work, avoiding family functions and conversations about Alex altogether. When I asked him how he felt about everything, his response was always the same. I've made my peace with it, but I could tell he hadn't. The pain lingered in the way he avoided eye contact whenever Alex's name came up, the way his jaw tightened when my mom tried to defend him. He didn't talk about it, but the betrayal had left a deep scar on him too. My mom, Linda, never wavered in her support of Alex. She called him regularly, invited him to every family event, and defended him at every opportunity. He's still your brother, she would say, her voice pleading. He made a mistake, but he's trying to make amends. To her credit, Alex did try, at least at first. He sent me letters, left voicemails, and even showed up at my apartment once. But I wasn't ready to forgive him, and eventually, he stopped trying. My mom's insistence that we forgive him only deepened the divide in our family. One particularly explosive argument happened at Christmas. My mom had invited Alex to dinner without telling anyone. When he walked through the door, the room went silent. My dad stood up, his face dark with anger. "What is he doing here?" he demanded, glaring at my mom. "I invited him," she said, her voice trembling. "He's part of this family, whether you like it or not." "He stopped being part of this family the day he betrayed Thomas," my dad shot back. I stood there, torn between walking out and confronting Alex. Before I could decide, Emily stepped in. The family remained divided. My mom continued to see Alex, though she stopped trying to force him back into our lives. Emily and I stayed close, united in our resolve to move forward. And my dad, ever stoic, seemed at peace with the way things had turned out. In the end, I learned that forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of their actions. I didn't forgive Alex for his sake. I forgave him for mine. And in doing so, I was finally able to let go of the past and embrace the future.